When this video is complete, you'll have completed executing test code for our sample loan application. I'm Sean J. Burke. I'm the kid that took everything apart, put it back together, and when you told me not to touch it, I broke it trying to figure out what was going on. That's how I became a technologist. This video builds on a series for introducing the usage of Cypress I/O and automated quality assurance. If you missed our first video, take a quick 4 minutes to watch and see the vision we set out. It will show you the working solution around automation of a loan application form using Cypress.io. Then today, in this video, we'll describe how the code was built. Finally, if you haven't installed Visual Studio Code, Node.js, and Cypress, we've got a video on that too. If you followed our installation steps, you have a sample Cypress project already installed. We've installed the Cypress provided examples and verified the test suite ran as expected. To begin our loan application test suite, let's define a new folder. This folder will contain one or more JavaScript files defining our tests. Next, we'll define a new specification of our test suite and test cases. Cypress is built on top of Mocha and Chai. Therefore, the code may seem familiar if you've worked with those frameworks before. Since we have sample files provided by Cypress, let's be all hacker about it and just copy and paste from there to start our new file. Here we're looking at the todo.spec.js file. There's a header in the file, so we'll just assume that Cypress standard functionality and copy it into our loan application file. Next, we'll copy the first line of describe definition from one file to the next. We'll add in the trailing parentheses and closing brackets to ensure our method is defined correctly. We can think of the describe interface like the name of our test suite. Our test suite is about a loan application, so we'll name it appropriate to that. Next, let's copy the it interface statement. If describe gave us the suite name, then it provides the name of the test. It does this. It does that. I return to the code and start thinking about loading the form URL. I see the before each that is in the todo.spec.js sample file. Having done QA code for quite a while, it was obvious to me there would be some form of before all, and I set off to find it on the web. This was necessary, instead of using before each, because I only wanted to load the form once. I find the code, thanks to the awesomeness that is Stack Exchange, and set up the before method. When our business user recorded their testing steps, we captured the URL. I'll go to that code and do a copy and paste to set up the navigation in the before method. After I implement the it interface to add a name to the application, I fire off the Cypress runner for our loan application spec and let it run. It crashes. Okay, this isn't an issue. If you want to get your code right the first time, every time, you probably shouldn't get into code. What we are dealing with here is that our automated recorder didn't get the selector correct. You might be able to notice it says focus visible, which is not the name of the text box. Now, don't start the blame storm. This isn't really the fault of the Cypress Recorder. Turns out Monday.com is implementing their text fields in a way the recorder wasn't ready for. And that's why we have engineers, to resolve these problems. I simply set off with Google Chrome DevTools until I figured out the correct selector to use. I implemented that code, saved, and watched the runner do its thing. It passes! We now have our first test, which is an it interface statement, in our first suite, which is a describe interface statement, and the code is running. At this point, we've established a pattern. Identify a field our form needs filled, create an it interface statement in the code for that test, named appropriately, implement the Cypress code to replicate the user keystrokes, determine the appropriate selector to use emulating those keystrokes. We'll find out that finding the right selector is a big part of the challenge. But before I get into the heroic fight for the correct selector, it dawns on me that I'll be repeating this it interface for each test. We won't get into any code arguments here about my duplicated code. We're trying to create a basic example that's easy to emulate, and as such, we're going to copy code. Therefore, I iterate the copy-paste on the it interface, naming it each time for the field that it will test. I'm kind of setting up the structure here before I implement the actual test. When complete, I'll wrap the statements in a comment and then do the implementation for each interface one at a time. As I implement a block of code, it will be common to pop back to my recorded code and use either its selector or its typed value as part of the test. I merrily go about my way writing code, copying selectors, and mashing it all up. I run into errors while testing, such as forgetting to actually put anything into the type method while setting up the email test. Par for the coding course. I fix. I save. Cypress Runner automatically starts executing. Fix. I save. Cypress Runner automatically starts executing. When I get to the phone number, I find out I'm in for more selector fun. You see, to me, the phone number country code looks like a select implementation for a drop-down box. I set off to implement it that way and run into issues. I do as I always do and submit myself to the wisdom of Google, zipping across the net looking for answers. Ironically, I do not immediately find the answer I'm looking for, despite a number of attempts. It dawns on me to just go look at the Cypress recorded code. Sure enough, it has the valid CSS selector I need. I'm now able to access the element in code. I mess around a little bit more, figuring out how to set the value, and I'm almost there. I find that I need one last piece after I have set the value to 1. To solve this puzzle fully, we need to appreciate that Monday.com is implementing a pretty fancy text box here. You can actually search in the text box and other things of that nature. That's what makes it fancy. The side effect is that it's looking for the value 1 to be committed. When using your mouse, clicking on it does that. When typing it, we'll need to hit the Enter key. I return to the World Wide Web with a bit of sleuthing on the brain, and I find the appropriate code to send an Enter key. I knew it would be there. It's a standard function for this type of automation framework. With the one country code selected, I now add the code to populate the phone number and return to the previous work of implementing each IT interface section for each test. Next, we turn our focus to a test that will submit our form. With this test, we'll get to cross a classic tenet of automated testing, dealing with a page reloading and the current page going out of scope. In this case, our form submitting and the response page opening up. One of the keys to submitting the form is waiting for the submission, then the loading of the response page. I bounce around Google and find wait documentation to further my work with submitting the form. As I scroll through, I find there are a few basic approaches. Hard-coded sleep, wait for the URL to change, wait for the document resource, or look at the window. After reading the code, I then proceeded to just start hacking away and trying to figure things out. I started thinking that I'm going to split the submission into different steps. The first, to click the submit button. Then a second test that will wait for the form submission to complete and validate it was successful. I continue hacking at the code and reading the documentation. I fix. I save. Cypress Runner automatically starts executing. Each time I save the code, the Cypress Runner notices the file change and begins executing the test again. This is a cool feature in my opinion. Finally, despite how editing might make it look, there were numerous refactors for the form submission. Eventually, leveraging the omnipotent Google, I struck down coding errors, misused statements, and conquered the loan application example. We now have a working test suite to test our form submission. How cool is that? In this video, I wanted to demonstrate how the code was written for automating our simple sample loan application. I tried to communicate writing the automation code at a level that is not complex and understandable by beginner engineers or technical business people. We have covered the basics of starting a new Cypress project by leveraging the sample code provided by Cypress. We then highlighted a pattern applicable to this or most web automations. First, identify the fields for automation. Second, define an IT interface in the code. Third, determine the selector. And finally, implement the code, which implements the user actions in Cypress. Saying built-in quality is easy, and this is one example of implementing it. If you like this video, check out 2 more in the series. The first video set a business-level vision for using Cypress I/O in automated quality assurance. The second video shows how to install Visual Studio Code, Node.js, and Cypress I/O, which is the toolbox necessary for this type of automation.